It forms part of your orbit around the eye. As you can see, the upper half of the orbit. Orbit is that area surrounding the eye. And the rest of the orbit is formed partially by the other bones like your zygomatic, the inside you will find lacrimal bone, they all form the orbit. So while you are looking at the orbit, you can look inside the orbit. What do you see? You see a hole and a little crack, right? The hole is your foramen, and the crack they call fissure. So depending on whether it's on the top or at the bottom, they call it supraorbital or infraorbital fissure. And there is a hole above and below the orbit. Can you see the tiny hole there? That's your supraorbital foramen and infraorbital foramen. The hole inside your eye is your optic foramen, but I don't think it's labeled. The optic nerves go behind the eye, right there. All the holes, foramens are for passage of nerves and blood vessels. Nasal bone is obvious. The sphenoid and ethmoid bone, they are inside. First, you will have the ethmoid bone and then the sphenoid bone. The vomer is forming the bottom half of the nasal septum. If you see the nasal septum that divides the nasal cavity into right and left, the lower half is made by the vomer. The upper half is made by the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. Then inside, if you see in the same figure 8.3, you see a green and purple structure inside the nose or the nasal cavity on either side of the vomer. They call them nasal concha or concave. Those are the structures that allow passage of air through the nose. Maxilla and mandible, they are obvious. The only bone that moves in your skull is your, which one? Mandible. And you can see the foramen on the mandible. What do you call that region? Mental region, so mental foramen. Okay, and also you can see a little projection, protuberance. That's your mental protuberance. And there is a suture between the two maxillae. It's a pair that join in the middle by the suture, intermaxillary suture. And then let's look at page 238. The temporal and zygomatic bones, the two bones colored purple and light blue, they make an arch. What is making an arch? There are two processes coming together in contact with each other and make this zygomatic arch. And the process names get the name of the bone to which it's pointing to. So the process that's coming, the purple one coming off of the temporal bone is going to be called what? Zygomatic process. And the other one is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Then you can see a passage around where your ear is supposed to be. That's your external auditory or acoustic meatus passage. Below that you see a pointed sharp structure. That's your styloid process. Looks like a stylus. And this is all on the temporal bone. Acoustic meatus, the styloid process, and the mastoid process is the process that's coming on the edge of the skull on the temporal bone. Then if you see the inferior view of the skull, figure 8.5, what is the big hole that you see? Obviously, foramen magnum is the largest hole. Okay, and next to the foramen magnum, you see two little round structures. What bone is that? The whole thing is the occipital bone. These are little round structures, condyle, occipital condyles.
Condyle? Oh yeah, you're right.
Occipital condyle. And you can see the mastoid process a little further away on the edge of the skull in purple. Okay. And then let's look at the anterior portion in the same view. So coming from the maxilla towards the inside, you are looking at it from the bottom, right? So that's your roof of the mouth. So it's forming the hard palate. You have the process that's coming inside from the maxilla, that's palatine process, and below that you can see the two palatine bones separated by a suture, palatine suture. Can you see them? Some of you did the exam, some of you have the exam coming, right? Should know them by now. And you can also see the zygomatic arch and the two processes in this view. Then you find some of these various foramen. So right next to the foramen magnum, a little above that, you will find the jugular foramen. Just look at the holes. And then above that is your carotid canal. So the thing is, you need to spend some time to learn which one is on which bone. That's why they have color coded, if you know which bones they are. The purple is the temporal bone, for example. The blue is your sphenoid bone. The green is your occipital bone. So once you learn the names, then you try to associate with the bones. Okay, that needs some work. Then if you see, go up on the sphenoid bone, the butterfly-shaped blue-colored bone, you can see that area. You see a oval foramen ovale, and there's a very tiny hole, and then there is a little crack. So foramen ovale, the tiny hole is your foramen spinosum, and the little crack you see there, that's your foramen lacerum. Sometimes it looks like a hole, sometimes it looks like a crack. Then you can also look at the part B of the same figure, but now you are seeing inside. So now when you look inside, you can see some more structures on the sphenoid bone. Right in the middle, you have a depression, okay, like a cavity. They call it sella turcica. This is where the pituitary gland of your brain will be located. And if you see in the orange colored area, the right in the middle is part of your ethmoid bone. It's not the frontal bone. Frontal bone is in the front. So this is your ethmoid bone, where you see the green colored area with the projection and a lot of holes on the base, right? Can you see that? So we call this projection crista galli, and the holes, those are the cribriform foramina, and the plate with the holes they call cribriform plate. These are all part of the ethmoid bone. So in your lab exam, they are going to mark one of these parts and name the part and name the bone. So you have to be specific whether it's the crista galli or the cribriform plate, and name the bone means it's your ethmoid bone. Don't put frontal bone.
I have a question. How come when they give like the practical midterm, they don't give you like an answer key? You have to learn how to spell everything.
It is because if you make an X-ray of the wrong one, I-L-I-U-M, ilium, where is that? I-L-I-U-M. It's a bone.
Right.
Where is that? The hip.
Right.
I-L-E-U-M. What is that?
That's
That's your end of your small intestine. Does it make a difference?
Yeah.
So if you are in a situation where you have to spell right, you will be in trouble and you'll put somebody in trouble. So there is a basic reason to emphasize on the spelling. Honestly, even if you get one letter wrong, it should be a 0.
Wow.
Honestly. Some professors give you a little partial credit, some don't, it depends.
I think I.
Yeah. Then let's go to figure 813, where you will see the nasal concave inside the nose. There are 3 of them, these 3 tiny bones, depending on page 246, figure 813. I'm giving the figure number because I don't know what book you have. You should have the current edition, but at least the figure number is the same or it's one off. So you can see the nasal cavity can green and pink colored, those little bones, they are the superior, middle and inferior nasal concave. And you can see the other structures too, which we saw before. The nasal cartilages and all we will look when we go over the cartilages and the joints later on. And you can see in figure 814 a closer view of your orbit. So this is how you see, when you look at the skull, the first few pictures, there were tons of names. So how one would study? You need to go to the specific view of one section and then start from there and then relate all the names when you look at the main picture. Or you should make copies of the skull with blank spaces and then you mark whatever you want. The top view, the anterior, superior, posterior, all kinds of views. And you label the parts yourself, color code them yourself. It takes some effort. That's how we learn. And you will never get it wrong. And figure 815 shows the mandible alone. So it has a main body. Where it curves is the angle. And then when it projects further up, they call it ramus. And on the top of the ramus, you see a little rounded portion of the tip. That's your condyle. Again, mandibular condyle. Then you can see a notch, mandibular notch. There's a foramen, mandibular foramen. And the bony area where your tooth sits into the mandible, they call it alveolus. And the projections between those spaces, they call them alveolar processes. So that's your alveolus, your tooth is going to sit there, and these are the processes. If you can think of this as your mandible. See what I'm trying to say? You can see the mental foramen, mental protuberance again. Then you have one bone that doesn't attach or articulate with any of the bones. If you look page figure 816, you can see a bone right above the windpipe. It's called hyoid bone, Hyoid, hyoid bone. It's a standalone bone. Can we see that? And there are 3 bones inside the ear. We will see that more closely when we do the ear. For now, let's call them auditory ossicles. You can see it just above figure 816 on page 249. You see the auditory ossicles. At least try to know the names. Malleus, incus, stapes. There are 3 bones that sit on the back of the eardrum, the tympanic membrane of your ear. On the back, there are 3 bones that vibrate, and they pass on the vibration to your cochlea so that you will hear. So these 3 bones are of very crucial importance. And they have discussed the fontanelles in the next couple of pages. We talked about fontanelles in babies. they call anterior, posterior, sphenoid and mastoid. There are 4 fontanelles in the front, anterior, in the back, posterior. And here they call sphenoid like your squamous suture. And then you have the mastoid. So they also call it anterolateral, posterolateral. What does that mean? Anterolateral means lateral side, more in the front, more in the back. So you can see the fontanelles in figure 817. Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes. I want you to look up anything that you missed.